Today, we're going to talk about contract efficiency in Major League Baseball, WAR versus salary. My name is Jeff Hefferly, and I'm here with Julian Anderson. So today, we're going to kind of go through a roadmap of what we're going to talk about. First, we're going to identify the main problem, the motivation, and the research question behind our research topic. Second, we're going to talk about the hypothesis that we came up with. Third, we're going to look at some literature and review that. Fourth, we're going to look at our data. Fifth, we're going to explore that data. Sixth, we're going to use that data for some causal analysis, run some regressions on it. Then we're going to get some results based on that analysis. And then lastly, we'll draw conclusions based on those results. So when looking at Major League Baseball, there seems to be a huge problem with baseball contracts, seemingly. The salary range seems to be exploding out of the upper bound insanely. You see the infographic really describes it. The higher end players keep extending that upper bound. They are paid tremendously more than the average MLB player. Second, production metrics proven by various research data analytics in the last few years have shown that historical measurements such as slugging percentage or batting averages are just ineffective. Classic examples, Moneyball. Third, we'll talk about team-based valuations. Previously, historically, they've always valued players based on how the team did instead of how the player is doing. That leads us to our research question. Are baseball players actually being paid appropriately? And is there any discrimination or premium based on these positions? You can see here, there are certain players in certain years that actually get paid more. One player gets paid more than the entire payroll of certain teams. It's happened once in 2014, close again in 2020. And on the graph on the right, you can see how payroll seems to be correlated with wins. Again, the jury is still out on that. But our main concern is, are these baseball players being paid appropriately based on some production measurement, which we use WAR? I will now hand it off to Julian to talk about the various literature.
All right, thank you. Firstly, one of the main things we looked at was how research into what metrics teams use to pay players. This first paper, Evaluation of Pitchers, indicates that teams do in fact use team-independent metrics, meaning things that a pitcher can fully control to gauge pitch performance and thus pitcher compensation. This next study looks at performance over long-term contracts and found that aging players do in fact decline towards the end of long contracts which are typically the last ones they sign, whether it's due to age or declining production, but players on the verge of retirement are declining. Next, we looked at a study that was following up a previous study about minority players' career length. It found that from 1971 to 1985, Black players did have shorter careers than other major league players. This follow-up study from 1990 to 2004 found no such evidence. And this final study looked at which countries tend to produce different types of players. While there shouldn't be any difference in a player based on where they come from, different countries have historically tended to produce different players, archetypes. Our data mostly came from Sean Lehman's database, which is an open source collection of various baseball statistics. WAR, however, was calculated and found on baseballreference.com.
Now we're going to kind of dive into what the different descriptions are of our variables. First, we're going to look at our Y variable, salary, which is a player's inflation-adjusted salary for one season. Our data extends from 1980 to 2017, but we'll adjust it to today's dollars. Next, we'll look at one of our main variables, X variables, which is WAR. This is wins above replacement. It just measures a player's cumulative production in a season against a player against one player production, I guess. And then age is a player's age at midnight of June 30th. That's pretty self-explanatory. Years in league and years are pretty similar again, how many years a player has been in the league or the year in which the season took place. Next, we'll take a look at birth region, which will use a series of dummy variables indicating the region, such as the Asian region, the Australian, Americans, the Europeans, Latin Americans. Then we'll look at, lastly, the position. We'll also use a series of dummy variables there, indicating the player's position and the player played. We'll do a series of dummy variables indicating the position that the player played the most during that season. So now that we're kind of got our data description out of the way, let's look at data exploration. We're going to look at, we're going to use our main X variable, which is WAR, and compare it against our main Y, which is salary, and also age. And then we'll take our main Y variable, which is salary, and compare it versus years and age. You'll see some pretty interesting trends from these graphs. I'm going to hand it back to Julian to go over the first graph, WAR versus salary.
Okay, thank you. So this is WAR versus salary, looking at an average of players in a certain salary bucket. So each one is divided by a million. And see, I mean, higher paid players do produce more, but I mean, is it really worth $30 million to get 2 more wins above replacement? And this, looking at WAR versus age, so you can see a player's production as measured by WAR peaks around age 30 and then slowly declines.
Just to clarify what I said earlier, WAR is how much a player is worth per win above a replacement level player, whether that be a minor league replacement or a readily available fill-in free agent. So now we're going to look at salary versus age. So you can see as the player enters the league, his salary is very low. As he approaches that year or age of 31, it kind of peaks out. And then until 40, it kind of stays consistent following that trend line there with a strong R squared, meaning that the trend line is pretty consistent. Next, we'll look at salary versus year. You can see how high the upper echelon has gotten. Yeah, the range has extended, but it really hasn't compared to the outliers of the upper end. Now we'll look at the causal analysis, kind of look at our model and look at certain subscripts in that model. Again, all of those descriptions or all of those variables are basically what we just went over. But what we did is consolidate position into pitchers versus batters. And what also we did is took the 5th variable, which is region, and split it up between North America versus the rest of the world. I is equal to players and T is equal to years.
All right, so this is the table containing all our results. Under the simple regression, if we just look at salary versus WAR, found a statistically significant relationship, but one that had a very low explanatory power as seen by the adjusted R squared. We then included more variables, include all the aforementioned variables in the multivariate, and we managed to get to 35.2% for adjusted R squared with everything except for position or whether they're a pitcher or batter statistically significant. We then looked at, as age and years in league are highly correlated with each other, we looked at one regression without age and one regression without years in league. Results here indicate that years in league is a slightly better explanatory variable than age. And then following that, we did a regression containing all the data we had, meaning we split up positions into the full 10 different positions and the 5 different regions we had. We'll highlight more next slide.
So now we'll take a look at the results based on those regression models. We do see that there is a premium for certain positions, such as first base, right field. And in those 2 positions are paid more than our designated hitter, One of our theories is because older players do, in fact, play in those positions. Second, we look at WAR. Seems to be very significant in explaining salary, but not significant, or it's not the best fitting model. There's many more to salary than that. There is a strong corollary, obviously, between years in league and age. It does appear that the rest of the world, such as Asia and Latin America, are paid more than Europe. And furthermore, it seems like those players are paid way more than North Americans. North Americans actually seem to be discriminated against. We're not going to conclude that they're discriminated against just because our data is pretty limited in those aspects.
In conclusion, while we believe WAR should be the primary driver of salary, our regressions have shown that there are far more variables that go into explaining the entirety of a player's salary than just WAR. We found that age does matter. Older players are paid more, even when the production doesn't necessarily justify it. Similarly, certain positions, namely first base, right field, designated hitter, are overcompensated for their production. As we mentioned before, our theory is that it is older players who tend to get paid more playing these positions that are influencing that result. We found Asian and Latin American players are overcompensated compared to their production compared to the rest of the world. One theory we have is that it tends to be the best players from those regions that actually go, abroad to America to play here, meaning that it's just the best of the best that we see. Some data we wish we had would be ethnicity or race about players. While we can look at different regions, obviously we're missing a lot of information about people who are born from the very diverse country we live in. And we also are missing some contract information. We really only had salary in a given year. We didn't have contract lengths or team options or stuff like that.
Well, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.